Welcome to a City Voices interview with Max Guttman. Max is a certified peer specialist in New York State, and he's also a social worker with a license. And he practices, and he also has a business. And we're going to especially focus in on that business to see if it's doable for just regular Joes. Are you a regular Joe, Max?
I'm as regular as they come.
Well, I'm not talking about bowel movements. I'm talking about like, are you like a regular, like everyday man?
I guess for some people on the exterior would consider me an everyday man. I know on the inside it doesn't feel like it's every day. It feels like, you know, a bit different from the rest, but I think we all think we're a little bit different than the
Well, I
rest.
mean, are you a genius?
No,
All right, I'm not a genius either. So it doesn't take a genius to do what you've accomplished, right?
no, it does not.
All right, so let's get right into it. Now, you're an everyday Joe, which means and you're someone with a mental health challenge. Do you want to discuss like how you're like an everyday peer with a challenge?
Sure. So I live with schizophrenia, a schizophrenia diagnosis. And for me, what that means is I I'm tired a lot. That has to do with the medication I take. I take an intramuscular injection once a month, and it makes me tired, but it also controls my symptoms very well. And I'm not hearing voices. I don't have delusions, but if I didn't take my medication, it would move in that direction rather quickly, either as a result of coming off the medication or just my natural biological, status quo.
But you're in recovery now, and you've been in recovery for many years, and you decided that you wanted to be, well, now you wanted to be more independent and have a job and money flow and cash flow and all this stuff, as well as to give back to the community. So why don't we get into like this business of yours. Now, you're a social worker. You started out with a private practice in social work, which means you offer therapy, and you built your clientele, and now you have a regular clientele bringing in some money, and also people receiving fine therapy from you. And but then you later on incorporated peer support, and you turned it into a business, right? A limited liability corporation. Can you discuss all that?
Okay, so sure. So there's a lot there you said. So, it's interesting. So first I started off as a social worker and therapist years ago. And, I knew early on that I'd want to be in private practice because mainly as a result of living with a diagnosis, I knew I was never really a good fit for an agency. I worked in agencies. I started off in agencies, mental health agencies, practicing as a therapist. But I knew that I needed my own thing if I was ever going to survive on my own. And when I started moving towards a private practice, I said, this is really the next step. I was supervising other peers, I was teaching, I was supervising other therapists, was doing a lot of research, and I said it's time. So I bought an office space in Ardsley, New York. Okay, and you know it was really nice, a really beautiful office. I shared it as a space with other therapists. I fit in great there. They were lovely people. It was a lovely space, but I wasn't doing any social work or any therapy. I was writing my books, and that's how I started. So my private practice really started off as nothing. It was just me writing and writing and writing. Yes.
Now, did you start off as a certified peer specialist before you got into social work?
Started off, I was okay, so years ago, I started off as a therapist first, as a social worker. After my break and after my recovery, I went into social work school. I only later on became a peer after I landed at my first agency. And I found out about peer work. I'm like, oh, I can do this too. And
So
that's
tell
where
us
I
about your peer work experience and how long you were doing that for as a peer specialist.
well, years, a couple of years at the agency. at the agency level, about 2 years at the agency level alongside being a therapist. I'd be a therapist during the day, and I'd be a peer at night in the evenings, and weekends. And I'd be the same person, but I'd switch into peer mode and have my my clients that were peers that I meet with.
And you said switch into peer mode. So like, what's the difference between social work mode and peer mode?
It means no discussing certain subjects or not engaging in certain therapeutic interventions that I would as a social worker or therapist. So I wouldn't I wouldn't do therapy per se. I would, I'd talk about what it's like in your living arrangements, or how's it going with your therapist, or how do you feel? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? As long as it wasn't trying to maintain someone at the therapeutic level, all subjects would pretty much go. It's someone's life. But I wasn't doing cognitive behavioral therapy or any sort of therapeutic intervention. It was pure subject matter.
So, what was it easier? Is it easier to be a peer specialist than it is to be a social worker in a private
No,
practice?
just as difficult. Just as difficult. You may not be tackling certain subject matter, but as far as I'm concerned, anyone who's working with another person has a certain onus or responsibility with that person's life and living, so I may not be your therapist, Dan, but if I'm your friend or from your peer, I'm going to care about if you're living and if you're okay, and I think that's the big part about being a therapist. We're worried about people's survival and their health, so peers are too, right? So that, as far as I'm concerned, it's really the same thing. But back to when I opened that practice in 2019, Recovery Now, right? In Ardsley. Can I talk about that?
Yeah, talk about that. But right before you talk about that, so also a social worker doesn't like share about their personal lives, right? As opposed to where a peer specialist would, right? Isn't that a big difference?
Social worker doesn't. So it's frowned upon. It's frowned upon. Anyone can do anything they want, Dan. You know what I mean? It's frowned upon, and it's we're supposed to be therapists are supposed to be very choosy about what they disclose. But like I said, that's not written in the books. It's just sort of like the culture of being a social worker right now. It's not in the the manual of what you can and can't do, the code book of being a social worker. It's not in there.
All right, now you were about to get into starting this business. It was first a social work practice. Tell us about even like the legal issues and
I will. I'll get right into it.
everything.
I'll get into it. So the first 3 years, it was just me writing, and it was no LLC. It was just Max Guttman. I hung up my shingle in Ardsley, New York, and I had an office. I didn't meet with anyone. And eventually, because of the pandemic, that closed down, and I never, had another office space after that. But thank God for the pandemic and my health and surviving it. I said to myself, hey, look, everyone's doing telehealth now. I really should give this another go and try this again. So what I did was I said, okay, I'm going to start an LLC and not make it Max Guttman LCSW out there. It's going to be Recovery Now LLC. And I started doing that and meeting with clients, and the wheels started moving a little bit. And eventually they started moving a lot. And I said, okay, I want to increase how many insurance payers I have. I want Medicaid money. I want Medicare clients.
But get into even the details about like what was involved in becoming an LLC and acquiring the clients and everything.
Essentially, to become an LLC, which was a mistake, and I want to get into that. All I had to do was contact LegalZoom and say, one of these companies that, get your information, they get your articles of organization, and basically they see what you're doing and they do the legal end of it, and you become an LLC. But for a social worker and therapist, you don't want to become an LLC. You want to become a PLLC. And that was my big mistake. So I had this company, Recovery Now, and I can meet with some insurance payers, get paid by some insurance companies, but for Medicare, Medicaid, the government payers, they weren't willing to credential me, and all these other companies. So you get credentialed to, it's what happens. You hire companies, okay, when you become a business, and they basically take all your information, they throw it at these companies like Aetna, Cigna, all these insurance companies, and then the insurance company contracts with you or your business. But since I was an LLC and not a PLLC, the government didn't want to have anything to do with me because I was supposed to become a professional limited liability company as opposed to a limited liability company. And what happened was the government was like, no. And they rejected the name Recovery Now. They didn't like that because they said that it implies that people are going to get better. And I'm thinking like they are going to get better than my clients. But they didn't want that name. So apparently the state education department is not in the same place as, peer services and the Office of Mental Health at the state level. They're just not thinking the same thing. But I'm not going to get into that. All I'm going to tell you is that they couldn't let me do Recovery Now. So I had to reorganize and start a new company. I had to go to a lawyer. And the lawyer set me up with a PLLC the same way LegalZoom did, okay, which was probably what I should have done in the first place, seen a lawyer and not just go to LegalZoom, thinking I know what to do and what to tell them, But I went to the lawyer. The lawyer created a new name. He said, "What names do you want, Max?" And he went to the state education department himself and made sure I could use those names. And we came up with Mindful Living, LCSW PLLC as the DBA. So that's the basically doing business as, but with the state education department, it's still Bronx River Road, licensed clinical social work, LLC. Go figure, right? But they approved that as the real business name. So it was all backwards and topsy-turvy with the name of the business and what type of entity it was. But I had to press on. If you're a business owner, you can't let that interfere with things. You just have to keep doing business and, have these meetings and have these issues and problem solve while doing. I was seeing clients during this time. I can't fret about it and get upset and lose a day. No, I had to meet with 6 clients a day,
Now, I think what's going to be interesting to our viewers is that you were doing all this and starting to make independent income, but
Yeah.
at the same time, you were collecting disability benefits, right? And also, and you're in subsidized housing, which is based on having disability. So can you talk about all the challenges there?
Well, yeah, sure. So, I mean, I was collecting money starting a business. But the money itself, because it's a business entity, goes to the business. So Recovery Now was getting paid all this money. And it wasn't a lot yet. But whatever money that was coming in was going to the business, and then I get paid out of that. And the business pays me a certain percentage of what my salary would be, which would be under the legal limit for Social Security.
But
Eventually,
essentially, since you were running the business, you were paying yourself, right?
yeah, yeah. Paying myself, yes, from what the business was getting paid. So the business gets paid first, and then Max gets paid as the therapist. And you know, so
So
that
you were able to be in control of just the right amount to pay yourself, not to interfere with the disability benefits, right?
yes, yes, correct. Also, though, as a member of the participant in supported housing, since I know when I'm getting paid, that gets I tell them what I get paid, and and then that's figured into whatever it is my monthly rent stipend is, or what I
But it
pay.
always stays at 30% of your income, right?
Correct, for supporting.
Whereas most New Yorkers are paying like at least 50% of their income for rent.
Yeah.
So keep talking about this business. Like ultimately you incorporated peer specialists into the business and somehow got reimbursed for that. So build up to that, please.
Okay, sure. So first I wanted to hire peers in the business. And I hired a peer to be my administrative assistant. And you know, the idea was the two of us would figure out a way of getting this government money. And in order to do that, it took an extra bit of time, one of our challenges, because well, the government wouldn't really meet with us until we were a name that was approved. So it took time. They had to meet with us under mindful living, not recovery now. And also, we had to figure out how it worked, how businesses get paid for peer services. A lot of private practices don't. So we were sort of like floating in the gray area, the unknown. Um, and after contacting Medicaid and saying, how do we credential, right? How do we get a contract with you to get peer work? They said, no, we don't do it that way. The only way to get paid for peer work, reimbursed for peer services, is to either be a core service provider, CORE, core service provider, or a different designation, but both had to be approved by the Office of Mental Health. And that's a special application and a special packet. You have to get approved by your local government unit. Do you think other businesses have time for this? No, they don't. So, I mean, we're still in the process of meeting with the local government and talking about what our plan is. We have to have a specific plan. Who's going to supervise? Um, are you going to be doing all these different things to make sure that basically a lot of different trainings and different meetings and procedures and manuals you have to have. You almost have to be like a huge agency to do this, because if you don't have a lot of staff, it's very difficult to do everything the government's asking you to do.
So how did you so you did it? How did you do it?
We're not there yet, Dan. We're not there yet.
All right. So you have
We're
you
meeting with the
hired peer.
government. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
we're meeting with the government now, and we have meetings set up where they're gonna hopefully give us the green light to do this, but it's still in the talking stages of, like, they're feeling us out. They're feeling us
Uh,
out.
okay, so let me get this straight. So you have how many peer specialists working for you right now?
Doing peer work. So I have a
Doing doing peer work, yes.
zero.
Zero. Okay. And now so
We're
what
hiring
now how many peer specialists do you have not doing peer work?
two.
Two, you have two peer specialists that you hired. What are they doing?
Administration and scheduling.
All right.
And
And
yeah, that's my hands are tied, Dan. I mean, I would have them do peer work, but we wouldn't get paid for it until the government says we're ready to pay you.
damn.
That's a problem. It's a problem on a lot of levels. It shows why, people aren't doing this. And I empathize with them. It's a lot of rigmarole, a million emails, a million, how do I do this? How do I do that? It's not taught how to do this.
So is it like, is it too big of a hurdle for most peer specialists to go into their own peer specialist private practice when you, as a social worker with your own business, can't even employ peer specialists to do peer work?
And you can't. You can't. Do you know how to do that, Dan? I don't. You can't. You can't unless you're working at an agency. You can't hang up your own shingle as a peer. And unless, I mean, you can if you're getting private money, direct to pay. So if someone's giving you cash or a credit card and saying, here you go. Thank you for your time today. But you can hang up your own shingle and do that. But if you're looking to get paid by Medicare or Medicaid, okay, you can't hang up your own shingle. You have to work for an agency.
All right. Yes. And even though right now, even though it's billable through Medicaid for peer work, only agencies have the capacity to
Get
make
that
this
money.
happen.
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. And you're just like a handful of people and you don't have the capacity, but you're
Oh,
working on it anyway.
we're working on it because we know we could get there.
Okay, good, good, good.
We once we
Hmm.
pass through the government talk and get approval and send in our application and hire a whole bunch of people, I mean, we can do it. It'll mean my life will change. So I probably won't be able to work with as many people, doing therapy. I'll have to do a lot more supervision, more meetings. I won't have time to meet with 30 people a week. Um, I'll have to, be the head of the agency or a company more so, and do a lot more administrative work, but we can do it. Anyone could do it. It's just that it's difficult to do.
What is your vision for the business that will also be like an enjoyable career for you?
Well, I like doing therapy. Ideally, I'd like to do one or two, maybe three sessions a week, maybe one group session, like group therapy session. But I'd really like to be making changes, having a research division, not just my research, a lot of researchers, collaboration with other agencies. I want us to really be doing something different. It feels like if you're doing something different, you don't have time for other things because you're working on that difference. You know what I mean? Does that make sense to you? I want to have time to be able to do all these things. That's me. I want to be able to do the research. I want to be out there at talks saying this is what we're doing. I want to be out there with my team saying let's work as a team and go on retreats and do exercises together, agency building, team building. And I want to be working on my website, blogging, and I want to be taking care of myself. If you're doing this as a peer, someone with a diagnosis, whatever you're doing, you have to keep in mind you have that too to take care of. And if you don't take care of that, this isn't going to work. So whatever I want to be doing, I want to make sure I have enough latitude and people to cover for me so I can step away if I need to and step back when it's time and insert myself at the right moments.
So you're a PLLC, right?
Correct.
And if you ultimately get the government agree to allow Medicaid to support the peer work that you've hired, um, then uh, what was my question? Jesus.
Mhm.
Oh, would you be the first of your the first PLLC to actually have a business with peer support?
That's a good question. As I would say, I mean, other agencies like big agencies that are maybe nonprofits at the nonprofit agency level, where you know they've got 20 or more executives. I'd say those folks have peers. We know they do. But as a business that started off as a solo practitioner, became a PLLC, and then is moving sort of in the vertical direction, with lived experience and disability owned. We're owned by we're a disability owned business, and peer run business. I'd say yes. I don't know any other peer solo practitioners out there or group practices that have peers under their umbrella.
Not in New York, right? But
No, it's
have you done a Google search to try to find colleagues all over the country, maybe even all over the world, who have possibly done this? Or are you the first over all the world?
I think I think each practice has its own challenges. and they're individual to the business. So if I may not be the first person to do this, but with my set of challenges and what I bring to the table, it's so unique that I'm not sure that even if I reach out to Italy or Montana, those businesses might not be able to give me the feedback I need to move in the direction I need to move. It's weird. It's like no one could have told me that I had to become a PLLC instead of an LLC at the right time. No one said, "Hey, Max, you're doing it the wrong way." Even when I knew other LLCs out there, right?
Your lawyer told you, right?
The lawyer told me, but all the social workers that had their own LLC didn't tell me because they thought they were doing the right thing because they weren't getting government money. You see what I'm saying? Because
Hmm.
as a therapist and as a business, you can be an LLC, but you just won't get government money. You'll get Aetna. Um,
Okay, so
uh,
you're a PLLC now. Do you have in your private social work practice, do you have Medicaid clients?
yes,
You do.
yes.
What percentage of your clients are Medicaid clients?
And a third are Medicare.
Wow. And
And
and it,
we only started to be able to bill for them um maybe about a month and a half ago. It took so long. It takes a long time to get set up to do that. And then it takes even longer to be able to figure out how to actually bill. Because you can get your contract, but then you have to do 50 other hurdles to be able to get the money once you hit submit claim in your EHR.
in other words, it's much easier to bill the private insurance companies than it is
Oh,
Medicare and Medicaid, right?
totally,
But
totally.
how did you do it?
I hired a billing company.
And they do all the work.
Yeah. Yeah. They asked, well, I'll have you notarize something or sign off on something, but a good billing company is going to be your right hand in this madness. They will know what to do on the billing end and the back end of doing things.
So let's say you saw a, Medicaid client yesterday. How soon would you see the Medicaid monies?
About a month,
A month. And let's say you saw a private insurance client yesterday. How soon would you see the money?
maybe around the same time, maybe a little less, like 2, 3 weeks.
Oh, okay. All right.
But the initial setup to get the money is what takes so much longer.
So you have to figure all that in terms of like paying yourself and paying your staff, right?
Tell me about it.
Yeah. So would you recommend like once you well, you could have saved a lot of hassle and trouble if you had gone straight for the PLLC, right? So
Yep.
that's one thing that you learned. And I'm sure that and there's other things that you learned along the way. Like if you knew all this ahead of time, would it be much more streamlined to where you are today?
Yes, yes. But I tell myself, Max, no one was going to tell you, Max, you had to figure it out on your own. I try not to beat myself up about it, but the truth is I made a lot of mistakes. And a lot of them had to do with just at the level of where I said my business was located, my address. If that had been the right thing, I wouldn't have to do 50 address corrections and change checks around this side of town and that side of town and all sorts of just at the level of my business address.
So
Um,
most of these mistakes are at the level of like government filings and legal
yes,
issues
yes,
and that
yes,
sort of thing. So like ultimately once you're already up and running, but once you get the peer support up and running too, would you be willing to put together like a simple manual for any peer specialist or social worker who wants to incorporate peer work in to start or do you want to keep this secret because you want
and
people to suffer like you suffered?
I no one no one should suffer. And the truth is, Dan, I have to create a manual. Core Services says that in order for us to do this, our agency has to have our own manual on how to do it.
Oh, that's great. Oh, all right,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
And
So
and you did mention that you'd be interested in going on a speaker circuit. So I was thinking like wouldn't it be great if you gave this talk that we're having now to the Peer Workers United peer specialists who meet on those, twice a month, like, but just special guest speaker Max Guttman
No,
on how
absolutely.
you did that. Would you do that?
Yes, yes,
All right, all right. And we would share this conversation with them so they get a sense of like what your talk is going to
sure,
be about. So, to close and to just wrap up, yeah, we're almost done, Max. Um, to wrap up, what is your advice for peer specialists? What is your advice for social workers who have lived experience of mental health or addiction challenges? Go ahead.
sure. I mean, if you have a diagnosis and you want to take on a big, big project like this one, my advice would be to take it slow. Not so much your dreams and your aspirations and your hopes. Those keep those big, always. But what I mean take it slow is the moving mechanics of the business, decisions that you make. Like me, I made mistakes with like just address and I made clumsy, silly mistakes where if I'd taken it slow, not responded to an email the next minute, or taking time to think through something before I spit back information at an organization that was processing my information, I would have been a whole lot better. I just sat on things and wasn't as impulsive as I'd like to be because I want things to move fast, right? Moving fast isn't always the strategic thing to do when you're running a business like this.